How do Mongols sleep through winter in tents without freezing to death? Imagine endless steppe, knife-sharp wind, and nights colder than -40. No walls of stone, no central heating. Yet families sleep safely in felt tents year after year. What survival knowledge keeps warmth alive when the steppe turns deadly? On the Mongolian steppe, snow is not always an enemy. In winter, families deliberately allow snow to build up around the base of the gear, turning it into a natural layer of insulation. This practice helps protect the interior from bitter wind and extreme cold during long winter nights. Snow works because it traps air. When snow settles against the lower walls of a gear, it forms countless tiny air pockets that slow heat loss. Instead of icy wind hitting the felt walls directly, cold air must pass through the snow first. By the time it reaches the felt, much of its force is gone. This reduces drafts and stabilizes the temperature inside. Herders choose camp locations carefully so snow will drift where it is useful rather than blow away. Slight rises in the land, gentle slopes, and natural windbreaks help snow collect along the gear's base. After storms, families may shape the snow lightly with boots or shovels, building low banks that hug the walls. The goal is never height. It is coverage and continuity. Entrances are always kept clear. The door and roof opening must remain free for airflow and smoke. Snowbanking is controlled and deliberate, never careless. Too much snow can block ventilation or make entry dangerous, so people monitor conditions daily. As winter continues, the snow hardens. Sunlight melts the surface slightly during the day, and night cold freezes it solid. This creates a firm shell that resists wind erosion. Once formed, these snowbanks can last for weeks, providing steady protection without maintenance. Inside the gear, the effects are noticeable. Floors feel less cold. Drafts near the ground disappear. Heat from the stove lingers longer through the night. Fuel lasts longer because less warmth escapes. Snowbanking costs nothing and requires no materials beyond attention and experience. It reflects a deep understanding of winter behavior. On the open steppe, survival often comes from using what the season provides. Snow, when treated wisely, becomes part of the shelter itself. At the center of every winter gear stands a cast iron stove. This small structure decides whether the night is survivable or dangerous. On the open steppe, where wind never stops and temperatures fall far below freezing, the stove becomes the heart of the home. The stove is placed in the middle so heat spreads evenly in all directions. Warm air rises and circulates around the circular walls, preventing cold pockets from forming. Unlike open fires, the stove burns in a controlled space. This allows families to manage heat carefully rather than wasting fuel. Fuel depends on location. In many regions, dried animal dung is the main source. It burns slowly and steadily, producing consistent heat with little flame. Wood or coal may be used when available. The stove heats not only the air, but also the felt walls, floor coverings, and furniture. These materials absorb warmth and release it slowly after the fire burns low. The chimney passes through the roof opening. This opening can be adjusted to control airflow. During calm nights, it stays narrow to hold heat. During windy weather, it opens wider to keep smoke moving. Managing this balance is a skill learned early in life. Before sleep, the fire is fed and banked. Hot coals are pushed together so they last through the night. In the coldest months, someone wakes before dawn to add fuel. This prevents a sudden drop in temperature that could freeze water and bedding. The stove shapes daily life. Food cooks on top. Tea stays warm all night. Boots and clothing dry nearby. Children sleep closest to the warmth. Elders sit where heat is strongest. The stove does not overpower the cold. It holds it at bay. Combined with insulation, routine, and careful fuel use, this simple iron core allows families to sleep safely while winter presses hard against the felt walls. On the Mongolian steppe, where there are few trees and no permanent shelter, choosing where and how to place a gear can decide survival. Wind is often more dangerous than cold itself. It strips heat away fast and turns mild temperatures into deadly ones. That is why site selection and orientation are treated as essential winter skills. Before setting up a gear, families study the land. They look for shallow valleys, low ridges, or the lee side of hills where wind loses strength. Even a small rise in terrain can block powerful gusts. Open hilltops are avoided in winter because wind there never rests. Camps are placed where snow settles instead of blowing away, signaling calmer air. The gear itself is always oriented with purpose. The door faces south. This is a rule followed across Mongolia. Northern and northwestern winds are the coldest and strongest in winter. By turning the entrance away from them, families prevent icy air from rushing inside every time the door opens. The south-facing door also allows weak winter sunlight to enter during the day, adding a small but valuable amount of warmth. Orientation affects the stove as well. Stable airflow helps smoke rise cleanly through the roof opening instead of being forced back inside by crosswinds. When a gear faces the wrong direction, smoke can linger, moisture builds up, and heat escapes faster. Herders also consider access to animals and fuel. Gears are placed so livestock pens sit downwind, reducing drifting snow around the entrance. Dung fuel stacks are positioned where wind dries them but does not scatter them. These decisions are not written down. They are passed through observation and memory. Families remember which spots stayed calm during past winters and which ones became dangerous during storms. Wind orientation costs nothing, but it saves fuel, effort, and lives. On a flat, exposed steppe, knowing how to read the land and face the gear correctly turns empty space into shelter. When night falls on the Mongolian steppe, the stove burns lower and the temperature drops fast. Survival through those hours depends on what lies beneath and above the body. Layered bedding and quilts are not comfort items. They are a final barrier between sleep and freezing. Mongolian bedding begins at the floor. Thick felt mats are laid first to block cold rising from the ground. Felt is dense and full of trapped air, which slows heat loss better than thin fabrics. On top of this base come carpets, folded hides, or padded mats that add more insulation and softness. Quilts are layered deliberately. Families stack multiple heavy blankets rather than relying on a single thick one. Each layer traps air, creating pockets of warmth that hold body heat close. Wool and cotton-filled quilts are common, often handmade and repaired over many years. In the coldest months, fur coats or sheepskins are added on top for extra protection. People usually sleep fully clothed. Winter clothing becomes part of the bedding system. Padded coats, wool trousers, and hats stay on through the night. Boots are placed near the stove, while gloves and scarves are kept within reach in case the fire weakens before morning. Sleeping positions matter. Families sleep close together, sharing warmth and reducing exposed edges where cold can creep in. Children are placed between adults. Elders take spots nearest the stove or thickest wall. Blankets are tucked tightly around shoulders and feet because heat escapes fastest at gaps. Bedding is aired during the day when weather allows. Quilts are laid in sunlight to remove moisture and restore loft. Dry bedding insulates far better than damp fabric. This system is flexible and portable. It can be adjusted nightly depending on wind, fuel, and temperature. In a land where walls are thin and cold is relentless, layered bedding becomes a quiet shield, allowing families to rest while winter presses hard outside. At the top of every Mongolian gear is a circular opening called the tonneau. This single feature controls smoke, air, light, and heat. In winter, managing it correctly can mean the difference between a warm night and a dangerous one. The tonneau sits at the center of the roof, directly above the stove. Smoke from the fire rises naturally and exits through this opening, but the tonneau is never left fully open in winter. It is covered with a felt flap that can be pulled open or closed using ropes from inside the gear. This allows families to adjust airflow without stepping into the cold. During the day, the tonneau is often opened wider. Smoke escapes easily and sunlight pours in, adding a small amount of natural warmth. Fresh air replaces stale air, keeping moisture low inside the gear. Dry air matters because dampness steals heat and weakens felt insulation. At night, the tonneau is partially closed. The opening becomes just large enough for smoke to escape while holding warm air inside. Too open, and heat rushes out. Too closed, and smoke and moisture build up. Finding the balance is a learned skill. Children grow up watching elders adjust the ropes by feel, listening to the fire, and sensing drafts. Weather changes everything. During calm, clear nights, the tonneau can stay nearly closed. During storms or high winds, it may be adjusted several times as pressure shifts. Snowfall requires constant attention. If snow blocks the opening, smoke backs up quickly, so someone checks it before sleep and again before dawn. The tonneau also protects the roof structure. Controlled airflow keeps felt dry and prevents ice from forming inside the layers. This extends the life of the gur and improves insulation. The adjustable roof opening shows how Mongols manage winter without complex tools. One opening, one flap, and constant awareness keep heat in balance. In extreme cold, survival depends not only on having warmth, but on knowing exactly how to release and contain it. Mongolian winters are brutally cold, but they are also dry. This dryness plays a quiet yet powerful role in survival. It allows traditional materials like wool, felt, and fur to work at their full potential, keeping families warm in conditions that would feel far colder in a wet climate. Cold air on the steppe holds very little moisture. Snow is light and powdery, not heavy or slushy. When it falls, it brushes off clothing and felt walls instead of soaking in. This matters because insulation fails when it becomes damp. Wet fibers collapse, air pockets disappear, and heat escapes fast. In Mongolia's dry winter air, felt stays dry and full of trapped air, which means it continues to insulate even in extreme cold. Inside the gyr, dryness keeps warmth stable. Moist air pulls heat from the body and creates condensation that can freeze inside walls. Dry air avoids this problem. Felt walls breathe without absorbing water. Bedding stays lighter and warmer. Clothing dries quickly near the stove instead of freezing stiff. The stove benefits too. Dung fuel burns more cleanly in dry air, producing steady heat with less smoke. Chimneys stay clearer. Ash stays powdery rather than clumping. This improves airflow and makes heat easier to control through the night. Dry cold also changes how the body feels temperature. While -30 is dangerous anywhere, dry cold is more predictable. People can manage layers, movement, and rest without sudden damp chills cutting through clothing. Frostbite remains a risk, but warmth is easier to hold once it is built. This climate advantage works with every other survival method. Snowbanks insulate without melting. Bedding stays lofted. Clothing remains flexible. The gyr's felt shell performs exactly as designed. Mongolians did not choose the climate, but their traditions fit it perfectly. Wool, felt, fire, and routine thrive in dry cold. In another environment, the same systems might fail. On the steppe, dryness turns ancient materials into reliable protection and allows families to sleep safely through nights that would otherwise be unbearable. Inside a Mongolian gyr, height matters. Warmth settles close to the floor, not near the roof. For this reason, Mongols sleep low to the ground using the natural behavior of heat to survive freezing nights on the steppe. The stove warms the air, but that warmth does not rise far. Gyrs have low ceilings, and heat spreads outward rather than upward. The warmest layer of air forms close to the floor, especially near the center of the gyr. Sleeping low keeps the body inside this warmer zone instead of exposed to colder air higher up. Bedding begins directly on the floor. Thick felt mats are laid first to block cold coming up from frozen ground. Felt traps air and creates a barrier that slows heat loss. On top of this base, families add carpets, folded quilts, and animal hides. Each layer adds insulation and prevents body heat from being pulled downward. People do not use raised beds in winter. Raised platforms lift the body into colder air and allow drafts to pass underneath. Sleeping low keeps warmth concentrated and stable. Children, elders, and those most sensitive to cold are always placed closest to the stove and the thickest wall. Sleeping low also works with clothing. People remain dressed in wool layers and padded coats through the night. Heat trapped by clothing combines with heat held in bedding and felt mats. The body creates its own warm pocket that lasts until morning. Positioning is careful. Feet and shoulders are tucked tightly. Gaps are sealed with extra quilts or coats. Cold enters fastest where bedding opens, so families check edges before sleep. In extreme cold, people sleep closer together, sharing warmth and reducing exposed surface area. During the day, bedding is folded and placed near the stove or in sunlight when possible. This dries moisture and restores loft, which improves insulation at night. Sleeping low to the ground is not tradition for comfort. It is physics applied through experience. On the open steppe, where walls are thin and wind never stops, survival depends on staying where the warmth naturally settles. The most important reason a Mongolian gyr stays warm in winter is felt. Thick sheepwool felt forms the outer skin of the home, turning a simple wooden frame into a shelter that can withstand brutal cold and constant wind on the open steppe. Felt is made by compressing sheepwool with moisture, heat, and pressure until the fibers lock together. This process creates a dense material filled with tiny air pockets. Those pockets trap warm air and slow heat loss, making felt one of the most effective natural insulators in dry, cold climates. In winter, a gyr is wrapped in multiple layers of felt. One layer is never enough. Families add 2, 3, sometimes 4 layers depending on the severity of the season. Each layer overlaps carefully so wind cannot slip between seams. An outer canvas or hide covering is often added to block snow and reduce wind penetration. Felt works differently from modern insulation. It breathes. Moisture from cooking, breathing, and heating can pass through without soaking the material. This prevents condensation from forming inside the walls, which would otherwise freeze and steal heat. Dry felt keeps its insulating power even in extreme cold. The felt walls absorb warmth from the stove during the day. That heat stays inside the fibers and is released slowly through the night. When the fire burns low, the felt continues to hold warmth close to the living space. This creates a stable interior temperature rather than sudden drops. Maintenance is simple and constant. Felt panels are aired in sunlight when weather allows. Worn sections are rotated or replaced. Small tears are stitched by hand. Because felt is made from the family's own sheep, insulation is renewable and repairable. Felt also adds flexibility. Gyrs can be dismantled, moved, and rebuilt without losing insulation. The same layers travel with the family from pasture to pasture. This system is not decorative or symbolic. It is practical engineering built from animals and labor. In a land without forests or stone, sheepwool becomes walls. Felt turns wind, cold, and empty space into a place where families can sleep safely through winter. On the Mongolian steppe, sleeping is not a solitary act in winter. Families sleep together because shared body heat is one of the most reliable ways to survive long, freezing nights. This practice is practical, deliberate, and shaped by generations of experience. Inside the gyr, bedding is arranged so people lie close, often in a loose circle near the stove. Adults form the outer layer, while children and elders sleep between them. This positioning protects those most vulnerable to cold and reduces exposed edges where heat escapes fastest. Warmth builds inward, creating a shared pocket of stable temperature through the night. Body heat matters more than it seems. Each person releases warmth continuously through breathing and skin. When bodies are close, that heat is trapped by bedding, felt walls, and clothing instead of dispersing into the air. In extreme cold, even a small temperature gain can prevent hypothermia and frost injury. Family sleeping also makes night management easier. If the fire weakens or the wind shifts, someone notices quickly. One person can rise to add fuel while others stay warm. Children are comforted if they wake cold or frightened by storms. No one is left alone in the dark. Bedding is layered to support this system. Felt mats cover the floor. Quilts, hides, and coats overlap across bodies, sealing gaps. Clothing stays on through the night, and outer garments often double as blankets. Heat from the stove combines with body warmth and insulation to hold steady until morning. This arrangement also reflects trust and rhythm. Families fall asleep to familiar breathing and movement. If snow presses against the walls or the gyr creaks in the wind, people wake together and respond calmly. Collective sleeping reduces panic and conserves energy. During the day, bedding is folded and aired. At night, it returns to the same pattern. This repetition builds reliability. Everyone knows where they belong. Family group sleeping is not tradition for closeness alone. It is thermal logic. On a steppe where winter shows no mercy, warmth is shared, protected, and multiplied by sleeping as one unit rather than many separate bodies. The shape of the Mongolian gyr is not decorative. It is a survival solution refined for life on a frozen, windswept steppe. Circular and low to the ground, the The gear is designed to reduce heat loss and resist the relentless winter winds that tear across open land. A round structure has no corners. Wind cannot catch and pry at edges the way it does with square buildings. Instead, gusts slide around the curved walls, losing strength as they move. This reduces pressure on the structure and prevents cold air from forcing its way inside. In winter storms, this design can mean the difference between a stable shelter and one that bleeds heat all night. The low profile matters just as much. Gears sit close to the ground with walls that rise only as high as needed. Less exposed surface area means less opportunity for heat to escape. Warm air stays contained within a small volume rather than drifting upward into unused space. The ceiling slopes gently toward the roof opening, guiding smoke out while keeping warmth where people live and sleep. Inside, the circular layout helps heat spread evenly. The stove sits at the center, and warmth radiates outward in all directions. No corner stays colder than the rest. People arrange bedding and storage around the walls in a continuous ring, avoiding dead zones where cold could settle. The low shape also works with snow. Drifts collect around the base instead of scouring it away. This adds insulation and seals the lower edge of the felt covering. The gear becomes more protected as winter deepens. Portability does not weaken this design. The wooden lattice frame flexes slightly under wind pressure rather than cracking. Felt coverings tighten as they freeze, improving insulation instead of failing. Every part of the gear's shape serves heat conservation. Nothing is accidental. On a land without trees, stone, or permanent shelter, the circular, low-profile gear turns open space into refuge. It allows families to sleep safely while winter wind flows past, unable to find a place to grab hold. The coldest moment of a Mongolian winter night comes just before sunrise. The fire has burned low. The stove cools. Outside, the temperature drops to its lowest point. This is when experience matters most. Families do not sleep through this moment. They prepare for it. Before going to bed, the stove is carefully banked. Hot coals are pushed together and covered lightly so they burn slowly. Fuel is stacked within arm's reach. No one wants to step outside or search in the dark when the cold tightens its grip. Everything needed for the night is placed beside the stove in advance. Sometime before dawn, usually in the early morning hours, someone wakes. This is often an adult who knows the stove best. They rise quietly, still wrapped in bedding or wearing heavy clothing, and add fuel to the coals. A small amount is enough. The goal is not to create strong heat, but to stop the temperature from collapsing. This brief feeding changes the entire night. Warmth builds again inside the iron body of the stove. Felt walls absorb the heat. Bedding warms. The gear holds steady until daylight returns. Without this step, water can freeze indoors. Felt stiffens, and sleep becomes dangerous. The practice is learned early. Children grow up watching elders tend the fire by feel, not by clock. They learn the sound of healthy coals and the silence of a dying fire. In strong winds or extreme cold, the stove may be fed more than once. Fuel choice matters here. Dried dung burns evenly and predictably, making it ideal for night feeding. It produces steady heat without sparks that could damage felt. Wood is used carefully so it does not burn too fast. This routine is not dramatic. It is quiet, practiced, and constant. No alarms, no technology. Just attention and habit. Stove feeding before dawn shows how survival depends on timing as much as materials. In winter on the steppe, warmth must be renewed at the exact moment it is most likely to disappear. Sleeping warm on the Mongolian steppe comes from design, habit, and shared heat, not modern systems. Felt, fire, and routine turn tents into shelter against deadly cold. But sleeping is only part of survival. How do Mongols heat their homes every day without gas or electricity? The answer might not be what you expect,